Shivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Good. Be seated, please. Om Parameshwaram. Good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. There you are. Welcome to all of you for our ongoing Bhagavad Gita class, and special welcome to our many students taking these classes online. We continue our study of chapter 18 today, final chapter. We've just concluded Sri Krishna's discussion on three kinds of buddhi. Three kinds means sattvika, rajasa, tamasa. Three kinds of dhriti, intention, intention is good. And three kinds of sukha, three kinds of happiness. And in the preceding verse, we ended with tamasa sukha, which is falling asleep, something we all like very much. And I'm just pointing it out because there's one question. May I ask why the happiness of sleep is described as tamasic, when I thought that dreamless sleep is concomitant with turiya. Turiya, the so-called fourth state of experience, much understood. First of all, there's a lot to be said about turiya. We're certainly not going to go into it right now. But the main distinction, turiya is considered by most to be a state of meditation. It's not really, but if you think of turiya as a state of meditation, you have to be awake when you're meditating, right? I know some people do fall asleep during meditation, I get that. But when you sleep, your mind goes into a state of dissolution. Your mind is present in what's called a bija avastha, a seed condition or seed state. Your mind is unmanifest in sleep. In meditation, your mind is fully manifest. You're fully awake. There's much more to be said, especially about turiya. There's a video on my YouTube channel which will explain turiya in great detail. And I would highly, if you haven't watched it, that's really an important video. I'd encourage you to see that video. Okay, so we finished now three kinds of buddhi, three kinds of dhriti, and three kinds of sukha. And now we conclude this lengthy topic on sattva, rajas, and tamas. It was introduced way back in chapter 14, and we saw it in chapters 16, 17, and here at the beginning of 18. So we will begin with some chanting. As always, as I'm chanting, read the translation and then repeat after me. Natarasti prativyam va Natarasti prativyam va Divi deveshu va punaha Divi deveshu va punaha Sattvam prakriti jar muktam Sattvam prakriti jar muktam Yadebisyadribhir gunaihi Yadebisyadribhir gunaihi Brahmana kshat kshatriya visham, brahmana kshatriya visham, shudranan cha parantapa, shudranan cha paran. Karmani pravibhaktani, karmani pravibhaktani, swabhava prabhavargunaihi, swabhava prabhavargunaihi. Shamodamastapa shaucham, shamodamastapa shaucham, kshantirarjavameva cha, kshantirarjavameva. Jnanam vijnanamastikyam, jnanam vijnanamastikyam, brahma karma swabhavajam, brahma karma swabhavajam, shauryam tejo dhritirdakshyam, shauryam tejo dhritirdakshyam, yuddhe chapya palayanam, yuddhe chapya palayanam. Dhanam ishvara bhavascha, dhanam ishvara bhavascha, kshatram karma swabhavajam, kshatram karma swabhavajam, krishigo rakshyavanejyam, krishigo rakshyavanejyam, vaishya karma swabhavajam, vaishya karma swabhavajam, paricharyatmakam karma, paricharyatmakam karma, shudrasyapi swabhavajam, shudrasyapi swabhavajam, swe swe karmanyabhirataha, swe swe karmanyabhirataha, samsiddhim labhate naraha, samsiddhim labhate. Swakarma niratha siddhim, swakarma niratha siddhim, yatha vindati tachrinu, yatha vindati tachrinu. On verse, just back up 144. Last week I talked a little bit about pronunciation, about chanting in the meter. I just wanted to point out another good example in the last line here. Shudrasya api. Now, api is followed by swa, which is two consonants together. So there's actually a small pause there. Most of you were following that pause correctly. So notice how I chanted. Shudrasyapi swabhavajam. That pause is intentional, and it's required to stay in the proper meter. Okay, and just to refer to something we discussed a little bit last week. We continue now. As I said, this first verse actually concludes all of this discussion on the three gunas. And just to refresh our memories, it's been a while since we talked about the basics. And we've discussed before how these three gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas, are part of an ancient worldview. Our modern worldview is everything is matter and energy. In fact, a postmodern worldview is matter and energy are different forms of the same thing. But matter and energy will do. In ancient times, instead of matter and energy, they had sattva, rajas, tamas. These are equivalent concepts. Just as we considered the universe to be composed of matter and energy, in ancient times they considered everything in the universe to be composed of these three principles in different combinations. Sattva, principle of purity; rajas, principle of activity and passion; tamas, principle of heaviness, darkness, inertia, etc. So, by the way, worldviews continue to change. So, several thousands of years ago, sattva, rajas, tamas. Today, matter and energy. In 100 years, it won't be matter and energy. I don't know what it will be, but already they can't explain what is dark matter and dark energy, they can't explain. Which means our current understanding in terms of matter and energy is not absolutely, it's mostly correct, but it's not perfectly correct. So come back to class in 100 years and we'll find out how it's changed. Anyway, we have to be attuned to these shifts of worldview. Okay, with that in mind, let's see this final verse on the topic. Natadasti prativ, and there's no pause there. I actually made a mistake. See the mistake I made? I said natadasti, and I paused. There's no pause here. Pr is a short syllable. Okay. Natadasti prativyam va. Natadasti prativyam va. Divi deveshu va punaha. Divi deveshu va punaha. Sattvam prakriti jair muktam. Sattvam prakriti jair muktam. Yadebas yatribhir gunaihi. Yadebas yatribhir gunaihi. Prativyam va, here on earth. Divi, deveshu va, or in the heavens among the gods. Na tad asti, there is nothing, there is no what? No sattvam. And this is a little bit confusing, because sattva can mean sattva guna, but here it's being used as a noun. Actually, sattva guna is a noun, but here it's not the sattva of sattva, rajas, and tamas. Here, sattva is an existent thing. By the way, for those of you who like Sanskrit and etymology, sat, existence, reality, truth, followed by twa, which is like our English ness. So existence-ness, sattva. So that would be the meaning of sattvam here, and in the context of the verse, it simply means a thing. So natarasti sattvam, there is no thing whatsoever, prativyam va, divi va, in this earthly realm or in the heavenly realms, there is nothing here, and connected with the last word of the third line, nothing here which is muktam. Muktam means free. Free from what? Free from, we have to jump around, down, yad e bihi, which is free from these, tribihi, these three, gunaihi, the three gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas, which are prakriti jaihi, which are born of prakriti. So there is nothing here in this physical world or in the heavenly worlds, there is nothing here which is free from, independent from the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. As we said, in that ancient worldview, everything that exists is composed of these three gunas. Sri Krishna here adds, they are prakriti jaihi. The gunas are born of prakriti. So, just in science, there's so much analysis, breaking down atoms into particles, breaking particles into quarks, and eventually they'll break quarks down into something else, who knows? But that kind of analytical approach is common whenever we're talking about science. Here, the analysis starts with Prakriti, which we talked about at some length in our meditation session. Prakriti then can be analyzed into its constituents. Prakriti is, in Vedanta, Prakriti is a synonym for Maya, and it's used to represent the underlying fabric of material existence. Prakriti is the underlying fabric of material existence. In Western thought, that fabric of existence is matter and energy. And in this ancient Hindu thought, the fabric of reality called Prakriti is made of sattva, rajas, tamas. I shouldn't say made of, composed of sattva, rajas, and tamas. That's what he means here. Prakritija, it is born of, it is made of these three gunas. And that brings us to the end of a very lengthy topic. Notice how it started back in chapter 14 and then continued in so many of these latter chapters. This analytical approach. Analytical means dividing up into sattva, rajas, and tamas. That's one of the reasons that the final 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita are said to focus on jnanam. Now, not jnanam in particular as atma jnanam, self-knowledge, or brahma jnanam, knowledge of reality. Jnanam in a more general sense. So within that division, we can understand that the first 6 chapters are mostly concerned with karma yoga, not exclusively, but most primarily concerned with karma yoga. The middle 6 chapters, bhakti yoga, very clearly, and these final 6 chapters, which we're now concluding, mostly focused on jnanam. Okay, now we go into the next topic, which is kind of a transition. This final chapter is, I think, the longest chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, and it's mostly in 2 parts. We're just towards the end of the first part and coming towards the last part, which is amazing. You'll be amazed. But right now we're in a little bit of a transition. And that transitional section is where Sri Krishna talks about duty. And remember, the Bhagavad Gita opened with Arjuna's conflict about duty. He's conflicted, right? He knows it's his duty to fight, but he is emotionally repelled by the idea of fighting against his own family members. So it really is, we call it a dharma sankata, a conflict with regard to dharma. In this case, dharma is duty. So that's our next subject, next topic, which has to do with duties of various people. Sri Krishna introduces that topic here. Brahmana kshatriya visham, Brahmana kshatriya visham, Shudranam chaparantapa, Shudranam chaparantapa, Karmani pravibhaktani, Karmani pravibhaktani, Swabhava prabhavargunaihi, Swabhava prabhavargunaihi. So Sri Krishna begins by referring to the 4 varnas, so-called castes. The varna means group here. So the 4 traditional groups in ancient India: Brahmanas, who were priests and teachers; Kshatriyas, who were warriors and politicians; Visham is the business people. No, Vaishya, sorry. I think Vij might be the root anyway, the undeclined form here, the Vaishyas, who were not just business people. Mostly in ancient times, maybe we think of it as traders, but in ancient times, most of the Vaishyas were farmers, because Vaishyas included farmers. And finally, Shudra, workers, just workers. Whenever we make this reference to these 4 varnas, these 4 so-called castes, it's a loaded topic in modern times, because there's been lots of talk and argument about it. And we don't want to spend a whole class rehashing all of those arguments. We have, by the way, in earlier portions of the Bhagavad Gita. But for right now, let's acknowledge a couple of things. One is, we all know very well the abuses that occurred in India for thousands, hundreds of years at least, thousands of years perhaps, due to the so-called caste system. No one can deny the problems, the discrimination, the abuses that were a result of it. However, at the time that the Mahabharata was written by Vyasa, more than 2,000 years ago, the caste, so-called caste system at that time was not problematic. It became a terrible burden on society, but in the earliest days, it was a very natural division of people according to families. We tend, we live in such a mobile society, we tend to forget that just in this country, 200 years ago, let me say Europe. In Europe, and we'll make it 400 years ago, just so there's no confusion. In Europe, 400 years ago, if you were born into a family of farmers, you were a farmer. If you were born into a family of barrel makers, you grew up and became a barrel maker. And your family name was Cooper. Cooper means barrel maker. The point I'm making is 400 years ago in Europe, whatever family you were born into, that determined your profession. In modern times, we've lost sight of how human culture was not as it is today. Today we have an incredible amount of freedom, but even 400 years ago, you didn't have that freedom at all, freedom of profession. So, if that was true in Europe 400 years ago, what about several thousands of years ago? Pretty clear, right? So it was very natural, if you were born in a Brahmana family, you became a priest or teacher. If you were born in a Kshatriya family, you probably became a warrior, unless you were part of a royal family. If you're born in a Vaishya family, then probably you were a farmer, and you would grow up to be a farmer. And if you were born in a Shudra family, workers, you would grow up to be that. And it was not a big deal. It was not an oppressive system at this time. So let's distinguish. We understand how oppressive the system became over time. I don't want to recount all the details. We've discussed it. You can go back to some earlier Bhagavad Gita verse where we've discussed the 4 varnas. Or there's one video, I wrote it down. There's one of my videos with an interesting title, Spiritual Cure for Hate, Casteism, and Discrimination. A spiritual cure for hate, casteism, and discrimination. And the reason it actually talks about Shankaracharya's Manisha Panchakam, wonderful text. But in that video, I discuss why and how what was originally a very natural, convenient structure in society, how did it become so oppressive? And I think there's a discussion in that video. So, can we agree then to set aside all the modern negative bias? Because it doesn't apply here. In ancient times, this fourfold division was a natural societal division. And each of these 4 had different responsibilities. Karma, in the third line, karmani pravibhaktani. They're karmas. And karma here doesn't simply mean action, but it refers to the actions which they were engaged in, meaning duties. Karma doesn't mean duty, but in this context, it refers to their duties. Their duties were pravibhakta, were divided up according to their varna. So Brahmanas had their own karma, their own duties. Vaishyas had their own karma, etc. And all of these duties were swabhava prabhavaihi gunaihi, due to gunas, which were swabhava prabhava, due to the gunas that they were born in. This is almost like a genetic reference. So if you're born, and this is again an ancient worldview, please don't apply a modern worldview here. You won't get the right meaning. In ancient times, Brahmanas were, each of these four groups were divided by families and by marriage. In those times, you would only marry within your varna. And as a result, there were certain characteristics in each group which may have had both a genetic basis perhaps, but certainly a cultural basis. So these groups were so divided in those very ancient times. I'm not saying that's a good thing. It's not, in that time, it wasn't a bad thing. They were just divided by family, divided by marriage, divided by profession, and as a result, their traits, here called gunas, their traits were also distinctive. And what Sri Krishna is now going to refer to is what are the required traits for each of these groups for them to fulfill their duties, to fulfill their responsibilities. By the way, after this discussion, Sri Krishna is kind of leading up to a further chastisement of Arjuna. When I say chastisement, remember at the beginning of the second chapter, end of the first chapter, Arjuna said, I don't want to fight. The second chapter opened up with this chastisement. Sri Krishna said, hey, get up and fight. It's your duty. In the famous "Don't be a wimp" speech is there, Klaivyam mastu gama parta. Don't be a wimp in loose terms. And we're leading up to a further chastisement of Arjuna. Do your duty. And of course, that's a message to us all. And actually, that's going to be, we'll come to it in verse 45. So let's see this analysis of what are the duties for each of these four groups and what kind of traits do they need to fulfill those duties. First, the Brahmanas. Shamo damas tapa shaucham. Shamo damas tapa shaucham. Kshantirarjavam evacha. Kshantirarjavam evacha. Jnanam vijnanam astikyam. Jnanam vijnanam astikyam. Brahma karma swabhavajam. Brahma karma swabhavajam. Here, Brahma refers to the Brahmana Varna. Brahma karma means the karmas, and in this case, duties. The duties of Brahmanas and the qualities they need to fulfill their duties. Actually, these are what Sri Krishna really describes here. What are the qualities of these Brahmanas that are required so that they can fulfill their duties as priests and especially as teachers. So what are in fact, you can even loosely think about this as the qualities of a teacher. What should be the qualities of, especially a spiritual teacher? What are those qualities? Up at the top, shamaha, internal quietude. Oh, you've seen me show you this before. A good way to find out what is the internal quietude of a person is to observe the body, because the body is sometimes an indicator of what's going on inside. And when I see someone doing this, that's pretty clear about what's going on inside. That's absence of shama. There's a disturbance going on inside the mind, and it's reflected in the condition of the body. Dhammas, self-control, restraint, proper behavior. Tapas, austerity, devotion to spiritual practice. Shaucham, doesn't need to be explained in detail. In fact, we had very detailed discussion about these traits in 2 places already in the Bhagavad Gita, so we'll just go through these quickly. Shaucham, purity. Purity is not only external purity, taking a bath, etc., but internal purity. And let's be very clear, internal purity has to do with your emotional state. Internal purity means freedom from depression, freedom from anger, freedom from hurt, freedom from resentment. That's inner purity, and it's crucial. Kshantihi, patience, forbearance. Arjavam, straightforwardness. Say what you do what you say. Jnanam and vijnanam, knowledge and we'll call it wisdom. Vijnana means a special kind of knowledge. So we'll just translate it. Knowledge and wisdom. Astikyam, faith, belief. All of these are Brahma karma. These are the qualities that Brahmanas require to fulfill their duties, and they are swabhavajam. Again, in ancient culture, if you were born into this Brahmana family, interesting. If you're born into a Brahmana family, by the time you're 5, this is at least true for male children, I think less often for female children, but the male children, by the time they're 5, they're starting to memorize the Vedas. And then they start memorizing other texts, including, this boggles my mind to this day, the way they learned Sanskrit in ancient times is you start by memorizing the sutras, the grammar sutras, Panini's Ashtadhyayi, some 2,000 sutras. You begin by memorizing 2,000 or 4,000? 4,000. 4,000 sutras you memorize in Sanskrit without knowing a thing about what they mean. You just memorize. And then, having memorized it, then you have to start decoding all of that. So if you're born into a Brahmana family, even though it was considered the so-called highest of the 4 varnas, I'm not sure it was so good for this 5-year-old kid who had to do all this memorization. So this is what it would be if you're born in an ancient culture, that these qualities are inculcated in your family. In modern times, that's less the case. As we said, we have mobility in today's culture. Your parents might not be teachers. You may choose to be a teacher, in which case you undergo education, college, etc., and in that education you inculcate these values. And if a teacher fails to inculcate these values, they won't really be able to fulfill their duties. Just a final comment here. Some teachers, you can remember teachers who most certainly didn't have these qualities. Do you remember a teacher who would shout at you? Probably. Maybe not, but there are some teachers who would get very angry and shout and berate their students, you blockhead or whatever they would say. And how did that affect you? Right? Very negatively. So for a teacher to be effective, these qualities are crucial. And if they're not inculcated from your family, they should be inculcated in your education. Next, Vaishya. Shauryam tejo dhritir dakshyam. Shauryam tejo dhritir dakshyam. Yuddhe chapya palayanam. Yuddhe chapya palayanam. Dhanam ishvara bhavascha. Dhanam ishvara bhavascha. Kshatram karma swabhavajam. Kshatram karma swabhavajam. Kshatram means that which belongs to the kshatriyas, so the so-called warrior caste. And warrior means it included also all leaders were part of that social group. So what are the karma? And here karma means the responsibilities, and what Sri Krishna refers to are what are the traits required for these kshatriyas to fulfill their duties. To fulfill their duties, what traits do they require? Up at the top, shauryam, courage, tejas, intensity, dhritihi, commitment. And I know my translation here is different. Words, you understand, words have many meanings. Don't get hung up on one meaning for each word. That's not the way languages work. There are different shades of meaning. Dakshyam, skill. Especially, if you're a warrior, you better know how to use your weapons. If you are a leader, a political leader, you better know how to rule. And I'm smiling because it's ironic. No soldier would go out on a battlefield without being trained in using weapons. But tell me, in this country, in India, and around the world, people become politicians without any qualifications whatsoever. In fact, I'm pretty sure in India it's the same, but here, an entryway into politics is if you are a famous person. In fact, there's a good example. I think in Arizona, a woman who was she was a news anchor. She was on TV. Carrie Lake, I believe, is her name, and she was a news anchor. She was on TV every night, so everyone knew her, and she was very attractive. That helps, and very well-spoken. And based on her performance as a news anchor, she got elected to Congress. Huh? You see the problem? And that happens all the time. It's not surprising that old school politicians were mostly trained as attorneys. Law. Anyway, the point I'm making is whatever your profession is, you need professional training. Especially today, look at how intense our training is. In medicine, my gosh, how much training is required to be a medical doctor? How much training is required to be a congressman or congresswoman? Nothing! And we see the consequences of that all the time. Okay, enough politics. Let's come back here. That is dakshyam, skill, at the end of the first line. Next, yuddhe, in battle, cha, api, apalayanam. This is a very funny way to put it. I've translated steadiness in battle. Palayanam means running away. Apalayanam, not running away. Kind of a funny way to put it. Not running away in battle. That's a good trait. Dhanam, charity. Ishvara bhavaha is the for a leader, it would be like majesty. And for a warrior, it would be this kind of image of being a mighty warrior, this kind of image. All of these are qualities required to fulfill your duties. If you are a warrior on a battlefield, if you're a politician, again, in ancient times, these qualities were inculcated through your family, and in modern times, they should be inculcated through education. And I'm sighing because why not? Why don't, pardon me just for my own pet peeve perhaps, I think it's not uncommon for most of us to be dissatisfied with the politicians who rule our country. Why not have a minimum qualification for these politicians? I mean, at least they should know the Constitution, they should know law. You could easily create some minimum qualification. Anyway, that's the point that Sri Krishna is saying, that if your profession is to lead people as a politician, you must have the qualifications to do that. Because if you don't have the qualifications, the people suffer. Not the politician. The politician makes money. The people suffer. Okay, enough of my politics. Next, the Vaishyas and the Shudras in this next verse. Krishi go rakshavanijyam, Krishi go rakshavanijyam, Vaishya karma swabhavajam, Vaishya karma swabhavajam, Paricharyatmakam karma, Paricharyatmakam karma, Shudrasyapi swabhavajam, Shudrasyapi swabhava. First half, Vaishyas, second half, Shudras. Second line, Vaishya karma. The responsibilities of the Vaishyas, which are swabhavajam. Sri Krishna refers to the qualities that they should possess. Actually, here it's less the qualities and more the duties, the responsibilities. So what are the responsibilities of the Vaishyas? First line, Krishi, farming. Go raksha, you can guess the meaning of that. Taking care of cows, cow herding. And vanijyam, trade. So these are the typical activities for the Vaishyas. The skills that they require in ancient times would be inculcated in your family, in modern times through education. And finally, the Shudras. Shudrasya api. Also for the Shudras, there is also karma, the duties, the responsibilities, which are swabhavajam, which are learned either from your family or from education. And what is that? Paricharya atmakam. The nature of the duty is paricharya, working. Literally serving, but serving means serving others. If you have a job, you won't like to hear this. Do you have a job? Do you have a boss? In a manner of speaking, you're a servant. my guru was fond of saying that in modern times, everyone is a Shudra. Everyone has a boss. By the way, even if you are the head of your own company, like the IRS is your boss and government regulatory agencies are your boss. So no matter what, according to my guru, everyone in modern times is a Shudra, according to him. Okay, that concludes this very brief analysis of duties according to your family. In modern times, it would be according to your profession. And now he talks further. Now, interesting. Whenever Sri Krishna talks about duties, you can be sure the next thing he's going to talk about is Karma Yoga. his favorite topic. It's a topic which comes again and again and again. It started back in chapter 2. Chapter 3 is titled Karma Yoga. Chapters 4 and 5 had a lot to do with Karma Yoga. And here we are in chapter 18. Karma Yoga comes back. Let's see that. Swe swe karmanya virataha, swe swe karmanya virataha, samsiddhim labhate naraha, samsiddhim labhate naraha, swakarma niratha siddhim, swakarma niratha siddhim, yata vindati tachranu, yata vindati tachranu. Connect some words in the end of the first two lines. Naraha, a person who is, jump up, a person who is karmani abhirataha. We have to break the words apart. A person who is abhirata, engaged in or committed to. A person who is committed to sway karmani, one's own karmas, and again in a prior context, one's own duties. Sway karmani, with regard to your personal duties. Naraha, a person who is abhirataha, committed to fulfilling those duties. What about that person? Labhate, that person gains samsiddhim, literally perfection, but it implies moksha, liberation, enlightenment. And there's something a little tricky here. Is Sri Krishna saying here, by merely fulfilling your duties, you can become enlightened? That's not what he's saying. What he's saying, you actually have to kind of read between the lines. He says, I'll help you. By fulfilling your duties, you can become enlightened. By not fulfilling your duties, you will never become enlightened. That's his point. So fulfilling your duties is necessary for enlightenment, but it's not the direct means for enlightenment. It's necessary, so without following your duties, which means if you behave in adharmic manners, that will be an obstacle to spiritual growth. One who is on a path of adharma will never gain spiritual growth. So Sri Krishna now continues to talk about such people committed to fulfilling their duties, to following dharma. Such people are swakarma nirataha. Nirata means the same as abhirata, means committed. So such people who are swakarma nirata, who are committed to fulfilling their duties, such people, vindati, such a person, actually singular, such a person, vindati, gains siddhim, gains perfection, is on the path to moksha, on the path to enlightenment. Yatha. How? Well, the manner in which they gain enlightenment by following the path of dharma. Sri Krishna says to Arjuna, Tatshanu, listen, I'm going to explain to you how following the path of dharma and fulfilling your duties leads to enlightenment. How? He explains. Karma Yoga, right? That's what he's introducing, and that's what the next verse describes. Yata pravrittir bhutanam, yata pravrittir bhutanam, yena sarvamidam tatam, yena sarvamidam tatam, swakarmanatam abhyarchya, swakarmanatam abhyarchya, siddhim vindati manavaha, siddhim vindati manavaha. We'll take this verse in reverse, take this verse from the bottom up. Manavaha, a person, vindati, gains, siddhim, gains perfection, and it literally means perfection, but that word it's like a code word in the Bhagavad Gita. Perfection in the Bhagavad Gita means moksha, means enlightenment. So a person gains enlightenment how? Swakarmana, through one's own karma, and again, karma in our prior context, through fulfilling your duties. So one gains karma through fulfilling your duties, but fulfilling your duties how? And let's be very, very clear. Merely fulfilling your duties is not karma yoga. I think in last week's class or the week before, we had this discussion. Merely fulfilling your duties is like a minimum requirement for being a good person. It is absolutely insufficient for a life of spiritual growth. And the example I gave is someone can be absolutely perfect in fulfilling all their responsibilities, but they go on complaining about it all day long and making everyone else miserable. What is that? They're fulfilling their duties, but with what kind of attitude? So karma yoga, and this is, it's surprising. Karma yoga is such a central teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, and it is so misunderstood. And I myself struggled to understand what exactly is karma yoga. The first time you study the Bhagavad Gita, it's kind of nebulous. So let's make sure that we understand karma yoga in a very clear and specific manner. Karma yoga is not what you do, it's the attitude with which you do something. So it's not that karma, what was that joke? I made that joke long ago. Somebody once, it was interesting. Years ago I was the manager of Arsha Vidya Gurukulam. And volunteers would come up to me and say, I'd like to do karma yoga. What does that mean? They take a broom and sweep. Taking a broom and sweeping is not necessarily karma yoga. I mean, they call it karma yoga, and I'm pointing out a very common confusion here. Tell me, why is it that sweeping your own kitchen is not karma yoga, but sweeping the ashram's kitchen is karma yoga? What is that? Sweeping your own home should equally be karma yoga. I'm illustrating the point. It's not what you do, it's the attitude with which you do it. And some people, this actually happened. One volunteer, I gave him the job of going into the back room behind the bookstore and putting labels on books. And they did it for a couple of hours. And then it came, can I do something else? Like sweep the kitchen? Now, why would they rather sweep the kitchen instead of be in the back room putting labels on books? And the reason is when you're sweeping the kitchen, others can see what a good karma yogi you are. Okay, enough said. Karma yoga is not what you do. Karma yoga is the attitude with which you do. And that attitude, we could spend weeks talking about that attitude. Sri Krishna talks about one aspect. That attitude is rich. There's so many aspects to the attitude. The attitude through which ordinary activities are transformed into sadhana, spiritual practice. The attitudes are many. Sri Krishna refers to one aspect of that attitude here. It says that you gain, that last line, people gain perfection, swakarmana, by fulfilling their duties, and here's the key word, tam abhyarchya, having worshipped, Having worshipped who? Tam, him. Who is him? Up at the top, him who, yataha, from whom, from whom prakriti bhutana pravrittihi, bhutanam. He from whom bhutanam, all creatures, pravrittihi, came forth, the creator of all beings, yena, and the one by whom sarvamidam, this entire universe, is tatam, pervaded. Very common definition of Ishvara. The one who created all beings, the one who pervades the universe, tam, him, abhyarchya. Having worshipped him, how? Swakarmana, with your actions, by fulfilling your responsibilities. Work as a form of worship. Now, what does that mean? It's not just words. This is a problem. Work as worship. Think of the feeling you have if you attend some wonderful puja and you're emotionally engaged in that act of worship. You know what that feels like, or even in an act of, not even, also in an act of prayer. You know what it feels like to be prayerfully connected to Ishvara. Maybe in this morning's meditation, prayerfully connected to Goddess Durga. You know what that feels like to be emotionally engaged in worship, to be emotionally engaged in prayer. Karma yoga is to have the same emotional engagement while you're working. Imagine the same feeling of intimacy one can have with Ishvara at times of prayer and worship. You can develop, I'm not saying it's easy, this is karma yoga is harder than it seems. You can develop the ability to be in a prayerful mood, a prayerful bhava, we can say, while you're engaged in whatever your work is. If you're at home cooking, if you're at work working on a computer, in any of those activities, it's possible to have that same feeling of reverence and closeness to Ishvara. It's possible to have that feeling while you're sitting at your computer. It's possible to do that while you're stirring a pot. It has to be developed. And how to develop it is what is a rich topic, which is why Sri Krishna devotes so much time to it in this Bhagavad Gita. Well, and I don't want to, if I try now, especially at the end of the class, if I even try to suggest how to do it in detail, it's not going to be sufficient. But better to focus on this. When you have the same bhava in your heart, the same feeling, well, that's a nice metaphor. The same feeling, you may or may not do puja, that's okay, but you get the idea. The same feeling that you would have doing puja at an altar, to have the same feeling in your kitchen, stirring a pot, to have the same feeling at your computer, clicking the keys. It's possible. Not easy. It has to be cultivated. And that's why Sri Krishna started his teachings on Karma Yoga in chapter 2 and is still talking about it now in chapter 18. By the way, we are going to see a wonderful summary of Karma Yoga coming up. So I'm going to stop this topic now because we're at the end of the class, but we will have an opportunity to review some of those, some of the approaches and techniques that can actually help you cultivate that bhava in your heart so that you feel the same kind of devotion as you would have doing puja or prayer. You can have that same feeling stirring the pot or clicking the keys on your computer. That is karma yoga. It's an attitude. You could even say it's a feeling. Excuse me. It's a feeling of bhava. Okay. Work as worship. It's not just words. It's very real. Okay. That was a good place to conclude our class today. A couple of important announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, of course, we have our Vedanta class at 10 o'clock. Shankara's teachings are just brilliant in his text, so come and join us. And by the way, if you come in the middle, you'll be able to follow, don't worry. Then immediately after class tomorrow is satsang, question answer, at 11 o'clock. Also tomorrow is our Samashraya support group. This is a newly formed support group for families and caregivers taking care of those who have mental illness. So it's not for the ill patients, it's for the caregivers and family members. So if that would help you, you can contact Vasanti, and she'll give you information on how you can join that group. It meets tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Also, I have a very happy announcement to make. We are finally ready to resume our annual anniversaries. 3 years in a row, we were not able to celebrate our anniversary because of the pandemic. Finally, the pandemic is over, thank God. And now we get back to normal life and normal celebration. So we are celebrating it on June 3rd, 2 weeks from today. So not next Saturday, but the following Saturday we'll have the anniversary celebration, so please plan on joining us then. Okay. We'll conclude with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashranvan Utbhisira Saranam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityor ma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.